This is a shir on Likutei Sichos, book number 25, Chelek Chafei, the portion of Vayera, second Sicha. Our sages tell us that in the merit that Avraham Avinu in this week's parsha addresses himself to Hashem in a humble way, when he goes before Hashem and asks him to please consider whether he can find mercy or whether he can find righteous people in order to be able to, that are living in the overall negative cities of Sodom and Amorah. But if he finds 50 righteous people, would you turn over the entire 5 Sodom, Amorah, and the other subsidiary cities if you had 50 righteous people? Hashem says, no, I wouldn't. You're right. I wouldn't kill everybody. If there were 50 righteous people, that would be enough to save the entire region. But I don't have 50 people like that. And he goes down and down. But at some stage in the dialogue and in the bargaining, Avraham Avinu injects a line which he says that I really, usually when you bargain for something, you come in, I'm a big shot. He says, I'm only like dust, afar, va'efer, and like ash. So I come with trepidation, I come with humility before Hashem, but still I cannot just walk by and see destruction there's going to be wreaked upon the people if I have a chance to stand there and defend them in front of God. But I'm doing it from a place of modesty, of humility, of weakness. I'm just dust and ash. Saying that endeared Avraham to Hashem, and in the merit of that, he received 2 gifts for the children of Israel in the future, and that is 2 mitzvahs that are done both with ash and with dirt. The ash is the ash of the burnt red heifer. We know that if somebody is impure, you take a red cow and you burn it, you take the ash, you mix it with the water, and you sprinkle them, and that's the process of purification. So that's in the merit of the fact that he said, I'm like ash. And earth, we have the earth of the sotah. So a woman who's suspected, perhaps, of having a relationship outside of the one with her husband, and her husband has warned her, and nobody knows what really happened. Hashem gave a mechanism, a mitzvah. In the time we have the Beis Hamikdash, that you take that woman to the Beis Hamikdash, and there is some earth mixed in from the earth in the temple. She drinks the water. If she sinned, she will not survive. If she didn't, that water becomes like the most magical potion, an elixir of, however you pronounce that word, of blessing. So, fantastic. Now we know that Hashem gives reward, midah keneged midah, measure for measure, as some people say, quid pro quo. So from this we understand also in our case that the connection between the 2 mitzvahs of the ash of the red heifer and the dirt of the sotah waters, the connection of that to what Avraham Avinu has used, technical language. Avraham has tried to say, I'm humble, and he used just technical language, but there didn't seem to be any greater depth other than saying, I'm worthless, I'm humble. But since he did use those words, and Hashem gave the Bnei Yisrael mitzvahs of that nature, it tells us that there's not just a connection between the words. Dust and dust, ash and ash, that's not an intrinsic connection. How should you say? It's like somebody came home and told his mother, I got a new car. So she asked, what color? The color on the car, yeah. Color on car is good, but that's not something intrinsic to it. The word ash and dirt, okay, technically the mitzvahs of the red heifer and the mitzvah of the dirt of the sotah also uses ash and dirt, but but here it's a humbling word that Avram says. How is that related in a more content-filled way with the mitzvahs that they got? So we would say that on the contrary, the fact that there is this red heifer actually seems to be different or in opposition to the character trait that Avraham is presenting here. By presenting his defense even of the wicked people of Sodom, what he's proving to us is that in his every fiber of his being, he's a ish chesed, he's a person of kindness. And therefore he has space in his heart for kindness, even For people that it seems to be that they deserve to be punished, he tries one more time with Hashem. Whereas when we talk about Avram as being nadiv, generous, b'mamono, with his money, megufo, not just with his money, but actually with his body, he helped people physically. Uben afshon, with his soul, on a soul level, he was generous and he shared his wisdom with others. And to the point that there's even a saying in one of the Sefarim, the books of Kabbalah, called the book of Sefer HaBahir, the shining book, which in that Sefer it says that Hashem's attribute of mercy, of kindness, complained to Hashem that so long as Avraham Avinu is in the world, I'm not needed. In other words, there's a representation of Hashem's kindness that's represented by Avraham Avinu, which supersedes the need for Hashem to have, so to speak, that angelic kindness, because already Avraham is the pure arbiter, the pure fulfiller of kindness in this world. But when we talk about the red heifer is actually comes from a place of strictness. First of all, the Zohar says that it comes from a place of small, of left. We know that right is generosity, left is judgmentalism. Also, the works of the Arizal, that's from the Zohar. In the works of the Arizal, it says that the word para, you see there's a par, which means a bull, masculine. Para means a cow with a hay. It tells us that there's, what is 5? 5 is representative of the 5 gevurot, the 5 severities. In Kabbalistic language, gevura, strictness, is like on the hand, where we have 5. Strictness is divided into 5 subdivisions. So the hay after par is a reference to the 5 severities. And it also has to be red. We know that when we talk colors, if you want to talk about colors in terms of Kabbalah, so the color white, like water, is chesed, is kindness, whereas the color red, fire, is a is a sign of strictness. It's fire. Fire is fiery. So the red has to be a red heifer. That's not it doesn't seem to be an Abrahamic kind of color, which Abraham is purely represented by kindness. More than that, the Medrash tells us that the fact that the red heifer has stipulations that it needs to be red, it needs to be totally perfect, unblemished. It has to be never had an ol, never had a yoke upon it. So there's 4 aspects here: a red, tamima, wholesome, unblemished, never had a yoke. These 4 details are representative of the 4 exiles. Again, why it's representative of the 4 exiles post-Egypt. Egypt was the first exile. Then we have another 4 exiles. That is the exile of Babylon, the exile of Persia, the exile of Edom, of Rome, and Greek, the exile of Greek. So we have 4 exiles which are represented in the 4 details that are required, that are mentioned, listed about the red parah, about the red heifer. So really, whether or not we understand exactly, but we do understand that all of this is telling us that the red cow is a gevura, coming from the left side, not from Avraham Avinu's side of kindness, which is the right side. So why, by Avraham Avinu speaking, does he earn this what you would expect to be measure for measure, but it's not Abraham's measure? Also, if we would be talking about the water of the ashes, water is kindness. There's an attribute of water that first of all, it's white, it's clear. Second of all, you pour it, and water has an attribute that it flows downward, which is like a giving motion. Remember, fire shoots upwards, so that's giving is water. Ascent is represented by fire. So if we talk about the water of the that would make sense to say that's an Abrahamic related kind of thing, water. And the water that was mixed with the ashes. But the Torah doesn't tell us, the Medrash does not talk about the water of the ashes, it talks about the ashes. The ashes is a result of the fire. The fire doesn't seem to jive with Avraham Avinu's attribute of kindness. So we could say the explanation is as follows. paragraph 2. And of course, when we get to the earth of the woman who's suspected, there's also a judgmentalism aspect there. It comes from, it's a strictness that we're doing, where we're testing her and so on. So how does it fit with Avraham Avinu? How does he the initiator when he should be the initiator of things that are chesed, things that are kindness? So paragraph 2, we could say the explanation like this. Listen how we're going to be taken into the world of kindness and find out that there's two ways to be kind. There's a way of being kind because of your greatness. In other words, when you see a strong and mighty king or a very wealthy leader, fantastically wealthy person, that because they feel so elevated and they feel so removed and exalted over the people, they have a generous way of sharing their largesse. So somebody goes, when you hear of somebody going to a restaurant, very, very wealthy, and he leaves $100 tip, this is the person feels wealthy and he can do it, and it feels good to make somebody else feel good. But that's coming from his feeling of greatness. It's not a bad, he's sharing, but it still is coming from, he feels so, so able, so exalted, so wealthy, he can just have pity on the ones that are a few strata below economically and help them out. But the problem with that is that because it's coming from a place of feeling your greatness, what it could degenerate into is what we call the kindness of Yishmael, who's the son of Abraham, but he gives and helps because he feels his pompousness, he feels his highness. And when a person wants to show his wealth, he goes around here, some people, when they walk around, they distribute things, money, and everybody runs after them, and they feel good because they're big shot. That's not a giving that comes from a feeling of humility. That's a giving that comes from a feeling of grandeur. Now, it could be okay, but it could also, you have to be very careful, it could very easily degenerate into something that's just self-serving. The second way of doing chesed is the kindness of Abraham. Abraham does kindness because he feels that he is not entitled to be any better than anybody else. He feels his lowliness. He feels his equality with others, and perhaps even less than others. He says, I am like earth and like ash, because he holds himself more unworthy than those around him. So now what he does is, look, Hashem bequeathed me, Hashem gave me fantastic wealth. Hashem doesn't want me to go and collect. I'm not going to renounce my wealth and go and collect money from somebody. That's ridiculous. That's not intended. But what I will do is I'll take the bare minimum that I need, and the rest I will leave for those other people that intrinsically are more worthy than me. Why should I be the one with the money? It's not like I have an entitlement to it. Hashem has blessed me with it. But if I feel myself small, I will share everything beyond what I need for my mere subsistence. I always put in a disclaimer here that many of us don't know what true wealth is. When we talk about wealth, we figure if I didn't have to worry how to pay my rent for the next year, and I didn't, that's not wealth, because in the back of your mind, even if you have money for your rent for a year, and for your medications, and for your food, and for whatever it is, and you have even a stash for a rainy day, still you can't just be giving out things. But imagine you have like some of the fantabulously wealthy people, hundreds of millions of dollars and so on, things like that. Avraham Avinu was maybe a billionaire. There, whatever you take for your own needs, and if it's meager and you live, basically just at an acceptable level, and give everything else away, that's giving from a place of humility. And that's what Avraham's kind of giving was, from a place of humility. Why is this way of giving advantageous? So it's not just that the person himself is in a state of humility, and that's a good thing. A person shouldn't be in a state of pompousness. But there's also a practical result that he gives others much more than he would give if he's just giving them from his place of greatness. He's now feeling that he's not giving them leftovers. He's giving himself the leftovers. He's giving himself the meager, and he's giving the rest away. And the Alter Rebbe goes further to say that Avraham Avinu's chesed was to the point, to an extreme where even if there was a reuta, there was some opposite of benefit, there was some Reuta is there was some damage that would be done to himself, some fallout for himself by giving that much. He didn't care. He wouldn't stop. Sometimes you help somebody and there's a price you pay. He was so humble and so giving that even if it was to his detriment, he would give. As we find by Avram, that Avram held himself. He says, I am like dust and earth. It wasn't just words he said. This was the way he felt about himself. That's why he comes before Hashem and he puts himself in danger by arguing on behalf of the turnover, the city of snow. So, as we've said in the portion of Lech Lecha we read last week, which really describes to us for the first time how Avram Avinu occupied himself with the attribute of kindness and giving, that in order to do Pidyon Shvuyim, in order to save the captives, remember there were the 4 kings that were victorious over the 5 kings, and they took people into captivity. They took Lot, Avram's nephew, but actually Avram Avinu went and freed those captives, where he put himself in danger to fight the war against those unjust kings who had come and pillaged, right? Not just did he give away put himself physically in danger, also spiritually, because it says that when the 3 guests came to see him in this week's portion, after he does his bris, his circumcision at 99 years old, and he's feeling a little ill, Hashem comes to visit the sick and to visit him, but Hashem sends him 3 angels in the form of a man. He's in the middle of speaking to Hashem and he runs to go get the angels. Now, he doesn't know that they're angels. He knows that they seem like people, but why is he interrupting a communion with God to go and serve guests? And the Gemara, the Talmud derives from this, that we learn from this, that taking care of guests is more important even than having a discussion with Hashem. But how would he have known that? He put himself in danger by going and doing that instinctively, because he wanted to be true to his incredible level of giving. Now, we understand paragraph 3 that for Avraham Avinu, we don't understand what communion with God is, but having an experience of receiving Hashem's divine presence for somebody whose entire life is all about spirituality and godliness. Can you imagine finally getting that incredible revelation of God and then leaving it to go take care of some strangers? And what kind of strangers? We know that these strangers that Avram went to, he thought they were idolatrous because he asked them to wash their feet first, because the prevalent tradition was people would bow to the dust underneath their feet. And that was idolatrous. So he had them wash their feet. So it means he didn't think that they were great fellow believers in God. Yet he went and he interrupted his speech with God in order to go greet them, which means he took himself away from the highest levels of godly relationship to take care of what seemed to be the lowliest of guests. Because even while Avram Avinu was not having a full-on godly communion, but we understand that they are called a merkava, a chariot. You know, our forefathers are called, what is a chariot? Today we would say a car. A chariot is something that takes you from point A to point B. Do you say thank you to your chariot or to your car? Thank you for taking me to my destination? Certainly not. What the car does is it just fulfills the wish of the driver. The forefathers saw themselves just as a chariot, just as a vehicle for God to drive. Whatever God wanted in this world could be carried out through them. Their identity, their independent identity was not important to them. They were at that stage of transparent connection with Hashem. Transcendence of their own independent identity, becoming absorbed in God. So that was the state of being that Avram always was in. And what is he? And now it's even more. Now he has an actual connection to Hashem, who's come to visit him to heal the sick. And now he runs to 3 wayfarers. By the way, how did Avram know that you can do this? We know it because Avram did it. We say, okay, he taught us a lesson forever. But how did he know it? But because he was at a state of total bittul, total a transcendence of his own ego, his own independent identity, or whatever was better for him, didn't play a role in him. He wanted to be there to do his mission. What is his purpose? And his purpose, he felt, was to greet wayfarers and to tell them about God. And so he interrupted what was a spiritual experience, but it was a spiritual experience for him Remember, the communion with God was for his exalted level. And he says, I have to put myself at the side, not just my own physical needs, my own physical, or I need to put even my spirituality at the side and go and look after those people. So you see a person who's literally on the level of paragraph 4, that I'm like earth and like ash. He's a paradigm of humility, and that's where his chesed comes from. That's where his kindness comes from. It emanates. His giving doesn't emanate because he's such a great wealthy person. His giving emanates because he's so self-effacing, because he sees himself as so humble, and therefore whatever he has, he gives. So in that case, let's see how's the connection between the ash of the red heifer and the dirt, the dust that was used in the Sota woman. So if we say that this kindness of Avram, his humility, allowed him to be able to surrender his own good, give up, be mevater, moser nefesh, sacrifice his own personal growth, godly growth, for the sake of others, and certainly his own material wealth for the sake of others, we'll see that that is the same concept of the para aduma, the red heifer. Why? There's a fascinating halacha, which is one of the reasons it's called the chukah. It's called a statute that's not understood. Why is it? What happens to the para aduma? Anybody who was involved in the red heifer process became impure, tamei. So you had to do it through a kohen in the Beis Hamikdash, but he lost his status of being pure for a while in the process of preparing these waters. Now, these waters are for somebody who's been touched by the impurity of a dead body, who's totally banished from the Beis Hamikdash. In order to let him in, we now have to do the process of the red heifer. But the Kohen that did it to help somebody else himself was demoted, so to speak. He was banished for the days it took for him to become pure. So there's a sacrifice there that's reminiscent of Avraham Avinu. Now, what kind of person does this Kohen have to descend into a state of impurity? For who? For somebody who came into contact with a dead person. Now, we're not blaming anybody coming in contact with a dead person, but spiritually, death is the absence of holiness, the absence of Hashem's presence. So if a person would be totally connected to Hashem, he's alive. So, in other words, what's represented by contact with death is a concept of being detached in some way from Hashem. So the Kohen is going to somebody that spiritually represents detachment from Hashem. The Kohen represents attachment from Hashem. We're telling him, leave your perch of attachment in order to help the person that needs to become reconnected to Hashem. So there is a very strong kindness style Avraham in the whole mitzvah of the ashes of the Parah Adumah, surrendering, giving up of yourself on behalf of somebody else. The true kind of kindness that Avraham Avinu practiced by feeling totally humble and totally unworthy in front of others. Similarly, that's the same concept when we talk about the earth that was used to find out if the woman was honest or not. What was the concept of the water of the Seder? So you have a woman, let's remind ourselves of the mitzvah, who her husband is suspicious, whether or not that's good or not. The Gemara debates whether her husband should be, but he's suspicious. She's speaking to a certain guy. He calls in two witnesses. He says, in front of my wife, I want to tell her not to be speaking to that guy. I'm suspicious of that guy. And then she's found to have secluded herself with the guy. Now, we don't know, did she do something that violates her marriage, which means she has to get divorced and so on? Or is it just speculation and really she's a woman of integrity? So the process is you take the earth in the Mishkan, mix it with the water, and there's a whole process. The Torah tells us she drinks it. If she was pure, then she is blessed and she can resume living life with her husband, and they have they live a happy married life afterwards. So really what we're talking about is making peace between a man and his wife. But part of the process is writing a few paragraphs of the Torah with Hashem's name and erasing that. Besides the earth that was put in, they also erased the ink which had those verses, including Hashem's name, into the water. So you erase Hashem's name so that this woman who's shouldn't have got herself into this thing. A good, upright woman would not get herself into a place where she secluded herself when, even if she wasn't told not to. Just it's not appropriate behavior. Maybe she didn't do a sin, but it's not appropriate. Hashem says, "I agree to have my name erased into the water." You're not allowed to erase Hashem's name. Here, He gave a mitzvah like that in order to preserve the peace between husband and wife. So, what is that a representative of? That's also a representative of chesed of the highest caliber, right? A woman of low stature, Hashem is saying, because we believe so much in giving and in helping and in saving, I agree, for the sake of peace, to even have my name erased into the water. Paragraph 5. According to what we just said about, so now there's a very strong connection between being afar va'efer, being dust and ash, to the concept of the paraduma and to the concept of the of the earth of the sota. This is all the same concept. When Avraham Avinu says, "I am humility of that nature," that's why he gets those mitzvahs that represent that same concept. Now the Zohar says, fascinating thing. The Zohar says that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair asked Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai he should say some new item of Torah that relates to the laws of the red part of the red cow. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, "You know what? My son Rabbi Elazar will say something new. He'll say, Rabbi Elazar, say something new. They're asking me to say something. Milachad, one word new for everybody to hear," and he did. So the Rebbe's father, in his notes on the Zohar, explains, why did Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair want to hear some new teaching about the red heifer? It's because Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair is like Avraham Avinu. And by Avraham it says, "I am like dust and ash." Which, because he said, "I'm like ash," his children, his descendants got the mitzvah of the ash of the red heifer. And that's why Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, who's representative of the level of Avraham Avinu many generations later, he wanted to hear something about this mitzvah which comes in the merit of Avraham. So really we have to understand, since the concept of the red heifer has a connection to Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, because he's like a follow-on in later generations of Avraham Avinu from previous generations, so why doesn't he say the new words of Torah? Why is he asking Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai to say the new words of Torah? And why is Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai not coming up with the new words of Torah? And he's telling he's telling his son to say it. But now we'll understand that the concept of being, when Avraham says, "I'm like ash and dust," it means he's totally bittul, he's totally humble, in a way of not looking at his own identity as being important. So the connection between Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair and Avraham is, first of all, why do we connect Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair and his generation to Avraham? We find Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair was also active in redeeming captives. Remember, we said, where do we find Avraham Avinu's kindness really described in the Torah great length? That he went to battle to redeem captives. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair is recorded in the Talmud as being somebody who was involved in redeeming people that had been imprisoned unjustly, redeeming captives. So that's the first story about Avraham Avinu, about his kindness, is about redeeming captives, which is putting yourself in danger to help a fellow Jew, to help somebody else. Similarly, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair is connected to Avraham because he also helped others. So now Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair wanted to hear something about, he wanted to not just hear something about the ash, he wanted to do it in a way where it's in a humble way. So how does he do it in a humble way? He does it in a humble way where he says, "I don't want to have the limelight and the merit to teach the new thing. I'm humble." Automatically, he was humble. He says, "There's something I want to hear, but I want Rabbi Shimon Yochai. If I'm the one who says it, then there's a certain sense of self." So he wanted that the one who has the great merit to say something new about this topic should be done by somebody else. This is, again, giving himself up, his own good up, on behalf of giving somebody else the kindness, which is the gift of being the one to share the words of Torah. Rabbi Shimon Yochai took this step further. He said, I'm not going to be the one to say, I'm going to also have this kind of humility, and I'm going to pass it on to my son that he should be the one to do it. Which is interesting because the original red heifer was not done by Aharon the chief, it was done by his son Elazar. Which the Rebbe says, technically you could say the reason Aharon didn't do it and Elazar did it is because it fits into the theme of the absolute kindness of the red cow, which is a mitzvah that makes the people that do it impure, and they have to sacrifice on behalf of the people that are becoming purified. And it was made not by Aharon, because he said, I'm also humble. In other words, he acted in humility, gave it to his son to do. The Rebbe, though, does point out that the Zohar says it needed to be, it couldn't have been done by Aaron. The way we're explaining now, Aaron could have done it, but he's acting humble and giving it to his son. But at any rate, the theme here is total humility. So now we'll understand paragraph 6. We'll also understand why the reward for Avraham Avinu's kindness has to do also with the ash of the parah and not with the water. We said the water would be fitting to chesed. No, it has to do with the ash that's remained after the fire. Why? Because this kind of kindness that Avraham Avinu practiced, that he gave away even his own spiritual level in order to help a second person, we understand that he even used his characteristic of strictness in the harness, in the service of chesed. How do you do that? Because the pasuk says, "For I know Avraham Avinu, I love him because he does tzedakah and mishpat." What is tzedakah and mishpat? Tzedakah is charity. Mishpat is judgment. Charity is not judgment usually, but he says no. Avraham Avinu gave charity in a way of judgment. In other words, he judged himself. How much do I need from myself? Absolute minimum, and the rest I give away. So he used strictness. That's a strict kind of self-judgmentalism, not self-deprecating, self-effacing. That's not kindness to himself, so to speak. He's not large and, no, he's being judgment, strictness to himself, but it's being used in the service of his overall concept of chesed, of kindness, because he's being strict on himself, now he's giving to others. So this kind of behavior where the strictness, the gevura, helps and is harnessed and is used in the service of chesed, of kindness, this has to do with bittul, with total self-negation, where, like saying I'm like dust and ash. Because if chesed comes, when kindness comes because of your lowliness, your bittul, your lack of identity, then your chesed, the kindness you do, is not limited to one kind of people. All kinds of people. In other words, when you give because of your own personal preferences, so maybe you like these kinds of people, maybe this kind of charity speaks to you. Other people you can't be bothered to help, you don't want to help, they turn you off. When you're giving from a place of total humility, it doesn't matter who you're helping. Your kindness is not colored by your identity and preferences and persona. You give, right? To the extent that even your strictness becomes used and harnessed for giving, like Avraham Avinu did. He judged himself, how much does he need, and everything else he gave. And this is why when Avraham Avinu is speaking about his extreme humility, that I'm like earth and ash, brought to these mitzvahs of the ash of the red heifer and the earth of the Seta, because the main achievement of being earth and ash expresses itself not in just kindness in a simple way, but also in the fact that he transforms his gevura, he transforms his strictness to kindness, which is the concept of burning, not the water of the red heifer, but the burning. Because what we're doing is by burning and using it by burning the ash, which is a movement of gevura, of strictness, and then using it for making people pure, you're kind of sweetening and using the strictness in the service of helping other people, which is what Avraham Avinu did. His kindness was not just from his right side, his kindness was also his overarching attribute, and even his left side, his strictness and judgmentalism, was only used in the service of, and this is called hamtakat agrot, sweetening the strictnesses, where the strictness is also used in a sweet way. And as it says in the Kutetera, that the concept of ash is aleph pei resh, which is, if interesting, the para, pei resh hey. Hey, we said, is the 5 levels of strictness. But if you use it in the purification process and make it ash to purify others, instead of having the hey, pei resh, and then hey, which is the 5 levels of strictness, you now take away the hey and you put an aleph, which represents Hashem, or which represents the strictness, but the strictness the way it is in its source, not divided into 5 divisions. And at that level, it becomes something sweetened, afer. So in actuality, that ash is used to bring purity. And this is also what happens with the dust of the sota, the earth of the sota, which transforms. The waters are called the bitter waters, but actually what they do is, if she is indeed innocent, it makes her bear very pleasant children. If she wasn't able to have children before, she now has children. If she had children that weren't so beautiful, she now has fully beautiful formed children. So the water is supposed to be bitter waters. They punish if you're not proper. But in the best way they're supposed to be used to find out that the woman is kosher, that merirus, that bitterness, is actually transformed into something of chesed, because these waters now become waters of blessing. So this is to explain how Avraham Avinu's statement, Anochi Afar Ve'efer, is absolute bittul, absolute self, feeling of selflessness, of being surrendering to Hashem, transcending his own identity, and being, all of that leads to Avraham Avinu's incredible kindness. That's the basis of his kindness. And that leads to the mitzvahs that also represent the same concept.